website for Robert Fox, who is a 30-year-old freelance UI designer and web developer based in New York. We have a little background on him, the companies he's worked for, and we also have some contact information. Robert also provided us with his logo, which is an abstract view of a fox, right, based on his name. Now, moving forward, we land on the website structure. So we need to create a 3-page website that will showcase Robert's work, will provide some information about his services, and also allow potential customers to contact him. So the 3 pages are homepage, about, and contact. Next up, we can see a short description of what the homepage should contain. And then the same thing for the other 2 pages. And then because the header and footer are common on all pages, we can see their structure here. So we need the logo, nav menu, and some social media icons in the header. And in the footer, well, we have a CTA, or a call to action area, and the usual copyright text, external links, and again, some social media icons. Then we move on to the website content. And based on the discussions with Robert, we created this structure, and we outlined exactly what we need to place in the website as content, right? So for the hero section, for example, we can see the title, the subtitle, or short description. So this is roughly the final copy or content or text content that needs to go into the website. And then on the client section, right, we want to display a list of these logos, and so on and so forth. The project brief kind of gives us all the information we want or need to move forward with the project. And then we have the content for the About Me page, all the sections laid out. We have the testimonials that we need to include, and then we move on to the contact page, and so on and so forth. Then we land on the final page, which is for the design guidelines. So Robert, in our talk, told us that he wants a modern looking website that would be easy to use by anyone. And also that he likes to keep things nice and simple and clean, and loves designs with lots of white space. And we also asked him about colors, and he said that he really likes the color scheme of his logo, and that he will be developing the website himself, making it responsive, of course, so we do need to make sure that our design works well on other screen sizes. So that is the project brief. Obviously, I won't go through every single piece of it. You can download the brief yourself and study it more closely. But yeah, this is our starting point. This is what the wireframe and eventually the final design will be based on. And whenever you're starting a new project, I highly recommend you have a sit down with your client, you ask him a bunch of questions, try and figure out what he wants from that website, who he is, who are his clients, and then put all of that information into a PDF like this one, so that you can move forward with your project much more easily. All right, now let's take a look at some key takeaways from this lesson. Always start a web project with a brief. In the brief, be clear about what you're making and who are you making it for. Be as detailed as possible regarding the final content and include that in the brief. The project brief will serve as a basis for the wireframe. All right, so now we have a project brief. We know what we need to design, who we're designing for, and we also have relatively the final versions of the content for the project. The next step is to create a wireframe based on this project brief, and that wireframe will serve as a basis for the final design. So let's go ahead and do that next. All right, let's talk about wireframes. These are low fidelity versions of your final design. You can even call them sketches. And the idea with a wireframe is that it represents or it shows the final content of the project and also its structure, but in a way that overlooks any aesthetic decision. Meaning, in a wireframe, we don't care about colors, we don't care about typefaces, spacing, sizing, any of that. A wireframe is purely representing the content and the structure of that content. Now, coming back to our project, we're still on the UX side of things, right? We're still looking at things from a user's perspective. And because we have a project brief ready, we can get started on a wireframe. And to save a bit of time, I went ahead and created the wireframes for this project. And now I'm going to walk you through and explain my reasoning for or how I made those wireframes based on the project brief. Let's go. Because we have 3 pages to design, I created a wireframe for each of them, and I did that in Figma because it just makes sense. I'm creating the final design in Figma, so I'm also creating the wireframes in Figma. There are specialized apps for creating wireframes. You can do a Google search if you want, but I think that Figma is more than capable of doing this kind of thing, so this is what I'm using. So what I did is I went through the project brief, and I started with each section and each page. So on the home page, right, if we scroll down here, we of course have the header and footer, which are present in all pages. So for the header, I know I want a logo, a nav menu, and social media icons. So I went ahead and I just typed in logo and then a simple menu with the pages and then some social media icons. These don't necessarily need to be the final icons we'll be using in our design. They're just here to tell the UI designer, hey, this is what you need to do, all right? And remember, this is a sketch. So then, besides the header, in the home page, we start with the hero section where we have a title, subtitle, and description. So I took those and I arranged them in a way that obviously is not final. I put the subtitle here, the title here, the the description, and then under that, because the hero area should also display the contact email and phone number and a button, I put those elements here. So email, phone, and button. Will this be the final layout? Probably not, but it doesn't matter. Because remember, the purpose of a wireframe is to display the content. And currently, this is the content. It's then up to the UI designer to dress this up. And he can decide to, align this to the left. He can decide, okay, I don't want this button here. Maybe I'll put it below. Maybe I don't want this contact information here. So it's not like what you see here is the final version of the project. No, the UI designer can also make some changes as long as he doesn't compromise the overall user experience. So then I did exactly the same for the rest of the content, just checking the project brief, adding content to my wireframe without having to worry about color or, typefaces. I just used whatever typeface I had selected at the time, which was Roboto, and the color is just pure black. And I did the rest of the sections. So here we have the portfolio section. And this is where we should put the portfolio images. This is a testimonial. And this is the footer call to action, right? With its title, subtitle, some additional information. This is the footer, which contains the copyright information, external links, and again, social media icons. And then the About Me page has this structure, again, based on the project brief. We have a introduction section here, some images, then some benefits for working with Robert, some testimonials, some services. These are the tools that Robert uses for design and development. And then the footer again. And finally, the contact page looks like this. Again, an intro section with much more visible contact information, a Q&A, and then the call to action, which in our case is the contact form. So these are the wireframes, basically. You don't have to get fancy with them. You don't have to worry about how elements look like, what color they're using, any of that stuff. You just start putting elements in the page, and it's then going to be up to the UI designer to dress it up. Now, in case you're the UX designer, but also the UI designer, then, you will probably make the wireframes a little bit more visually interesting or a little bit closer to the final version because you already have an idea of where you want to take this project. But if the UX and the UI are handled by two separate people, then it's totally okay for a wireframe to look messy, unorganized, just like a sketch, basically, because again, its purpose is to present the content and the structure of the content. Now, if you want, you can create your own wireframe based on the project brief, or you can use the one that I created. That's totally up to you. But if you want to use this one, check out the video description for a link to the final Figma file, and that's going to be there as a separate page. Okay, time for some key takeaways. A wireframe is a low-fidelity version of the final design. A wireframe should display the final content as well as its structure. A wireframe should be devoid of any intentional aesthetic decisions like color or typography. All right, so with the wireframe complete, we can now move on to the UI design side of things. So far, we covered the user experience, but now we can move on to the user interface and start dressing it up, as I've been saying. Before we do that, though, we need to decide on which UI, UX design software we need to use. So more about that coming up. All right, so as we're slowly getting into the UI design parts of this course, it's time to figure out which design software we're going to use. And I'm sure this is one of the main questions you're asking yourself as a beginner, because sure, it's relatively easy to learn how to use a design software, but it's always helpful to know about certain pros and cons of all the software that's available nowadays, so you can make the best decision. When I started designing websites back in the day, you only had like one option for the software, and that was Adobe Photoshop. A lot of people were using it. A lot of templates that were up for sale were Photoshop templates. Well, let's just say that was a painful time compared to today, right? Photoshop wasn't, and still isn't to this day, designed to be used for this kind of task. Eventually, I moved on to Sketch. Back then, it was obviously a lot different than it is today. In 2022, I think the version I started on was version 3 or something like that. But just so you understand how much better it was moving to Sketch, I remember this interview with Bill Gates and Steve Jobs. And when talking about iTunes being available on Windows, Steve Jobs said that it was like giving a glass of ice water to someone in hell, right? And that's pretty much how